Hey everybody, this is Perch. One of the things that happened in about 15, more than that, about 2005, 2010, kind of in that window, is comic books and editorials started to pivot away from subplots. Didn't mean they pivoted 100% away. They didn't turn to zero, but there started to be more of an emphasis to downplay them. There's a couple of reasons why this happened, but in order to explain that, we go a little bit further back to the 80s when the art of the subplot was actually something that was encouraged by several of the writers. And one of the reasons it was encouraged is because Chris Claremont was making a lot of headway with his title. Peter David started to make a decent amount of headway with his title. He was getting both writers were getting really good attention, and both writers heavily used subplots. So much so that Marvel would basically make fun of Claremont and make fun of the level of subplots in the Uncanny X-Men at the time, which often had, the main story and then like at least two, sometimes three different kind of running subplots that were going on. But at some point, the jokes about it turned to kind of an actual dislike of that style of writing. And Marvel in particular started making a lot of noise about, titles need to be new reader accessible, and that too many subplots are confusing. It turns readers off. That's one of the reasons why people are having a hard time getting into comics. There kind of became this entire long list of things that basically were used to reduce the amount of things outside of the main story arc inside the comic. The challenge with that is that a lot of the subplots kind of led to pretty major things. The Mutant Massacre had some subplots. Mr. Sinister, Apocalypse, a lot of these characters that became super big deals were actually teased out with quite a bit of forward foreshadowing and subplot activity. When the X-Men were in Australia and they were fighting Genosha, and there was these conflicts going on. They were doing this subplot with Madeline Pryor that ultimately would lead to her becoming the Goblin Queen and the entire Inferno event and crossover and everything else, which made the company a decent amount of money. All of that stuff. I think the lesson you take there is that many comic readers, because it's episodic storytelling, like to have certainly a main story, something that could be collected in a trade or in an arc, but then they like to have these ongoing subplots that are going to kind of feed into the next story, the next story, and the next story. If you read a comic book today, there's almost nothing in that comic that's teasing out why you should buy it 6 months from now. And you see the purchasing behavior dropping as a result. Again, so if we go back about 10, 15 years ago, the comics, the idea of the subplot was discouraged. And it was discouraged because, first off, they were giving writers shorter leashes on books. We'll hire you for 6 issues, or we'll hire you for 12. If you hire somebody for 12 and you take as gospel the arc format that Bendis popularized, writing for trade, of a 5 or 6 issue storyline, then you're basically left pretty stuck. If you have a 12-issue contract, you've got 2 of those trades, 2 6-issue arcs, and then you're done. So in that world, subplots and teasing out kind of additional stories and future planning become a lot less important, at least to the writer. But to the title itself, it's pretty disastrous. I think that this is kind of just a very, very easy pickup that comics can do that make themselves quite a bit more powerful and encourage that kind of long-term buying. If you have, it's very simple logic. If you come in for a storyline, the main storyline, whatever it happens to be, the Avengers are fighting Thanos, fine, and then you segue that into. And by the way, in the background, the Masters of Evil are plotting something because they're Masters of Evil, and over here you've got some kind of thing is going on with Tony Stark's armor that is making it unstable, and that could be a problem for down the road. And I mean, you start to get some pretty nice stories that you can tell if you're willing to at least devote a couple pages to the long game, it's not like comic books were longer back then. They were the same page count, or in some cases, 1 or 2 pages longer. But there's plenty of room for these things to happen. So why don't they? Well, again, it's as simple as contracts very short with writers. In some cases, the editors themselves are either overworked or do not have the kind of organizational capacity to deal with a bunch of running subplots. You can kind of line up a bunch of different things that get in the way, but it is the I think it's very easy to detect. Back 10 years ago, I remember when subplots started to disappear in comics. There were some writers that objected to it. I know there was a panel that went down where they basically were debating whether or not the subplot helped comics or not. But now, looking back on it, with now 10 years of evidence and kind of history in front of us, there's no doubt about it that this change in storytelling has hurt the sales, has hurt kind of the longevity of the comics, has hurt all kinds of things. It's no longer it's no longer, I think, a point you could argue. It's provable. And if you look at the sales numbers, you could see people more abruptly dropping out after an arc, if they even survive that long. If you have a number of your readers who are purely speculators, and by the way, if that's where a number of your sales are coming from, people are just buying the cover, then who cares about the subplot? Who cares what's inside the comic? Those people aren't looking at it anyway. So feel free, go nuts. Write your crazy subplot, write any of that stuff. It's going to be fine because it doesn't matter to those buyers. They're never going to open up the comic in the first place. But to actual readers and to people coming in, it's an important way to kind of tease out the stories and to have multiple balls in the air and basically get somebody hooked while they're reading the current arc into the next arc. So they're going to make sure to go back to the store and buy it again. And by the way, this other argument that it's unfriendly to new readers, uh, there's, again, no evidence that's the case. In fact, if anything, the opposite. A lot of these titles that were filled up with subplots in the 80s continued to gain more and more readers over time. They didn't just, there wasn't a new reader problem. When you look at some of these titles that grew, I mean, X-Men growing to, certainly it was a collector gimmick, but 6 million copies sold. Were the subplots really a barrier? I hate the fact that Jim Lee comic that had the 5 covers, or was it 6 covers? 5 covers, I believe. 4 normal and then a 5th that kind of gatefold. I do hate the fact that made as much money as it did, because it basically, the lesson that Marvel and the comic industry took away from it was relaunch things to number one, and cover gimmicks are good. And those two things have definitely, I mean, sure, there's a sales lesson to be learned there, but you also have to look at a title that was built up over decades with long running stories, plenty of subplots, heavy character development. Even if you look at that X-Men #1 issue and what went on there, you got some action, you got some background character drama, you got them teasing out some other things, even in this first issue. So, to take away from that, variant covers and different covers and gimmicks and relaunches are the key to success. Anyway, uh, there you go. All right, that's a whole other video. The point is, you take a look at your comics, you take a look at one major thing that's changed, and you certainly look at today's current arcs and current comics, you'll see virtually zero subplots. And talking to an editor, like, well, sometimes writers propose them, but we don't have the writer on contract for more than this arc, so we ask that stuff to be cut, because if the writer does leave the book, then what is a new writer supposed to pick up on that subplot? The new writer may not even know what the old writer was going for, so we ought to just cut that stuff out. Cool, you're cutting out your repeated readership too. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you've noticed this change in comics. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.